Okay, so now we're going to enter into the last section we have for price discrimination 3. We're going to talk about some exotic forms of price discrimination. To illustrate that idea, I want to go back to a question that I ended on, or was going to end on last class. You see it in the notes, was why does popcorn cost so much at the movies? And this seems like it's kind of obvious, like, oh, is popcorn cost so much because you're not allowed to bring food into the movie theater, and so as a result, the theater has a monopoly on popcorn, and that's why they charge so much, because we can. But that doesn't really make sense because they don't charge anything for the bathrooms, and you can't bring your own bathroom in. So the bathrooms are free, right? So if it's simply a monopoly, why don't they charge a lot for the bathrooms? But why don't they charge a lot for the napkins, right? If the napkins are free, right? They could stop you from sneaking in napkins too. There's a long list of things that they don't charge you at all, or that they're charged relatively cheap. And it doesn't really make sense when you look at it in scrutiny. But it does make sense when you think about price discrimination. It's an illustration we're going to be talking about today called tying. So tying is essentially when the seller charges one price for a good that can only be used with another good charged at a lower price. You can think of it as essentially two separate goods that the seller connects. The classic example of this is printers and ink. Even though you can only use HP ink with HP printers, they are tied together, but they're also sold separately. You purchase the printer, you purchase the ink. We sometimes refer to these as the base good, which is the good you only have to buy once, and the variable good, which you may buy a lot. Let's make that nice. That may part is really important. The whole idea is you don't have to buy a lot of it. And this is where the price discrimination comes in. Because it's best to, while you buy these separately, it's best to think of them as one good. You don't really buy printers and ink. You buy the ability to print. You buy the ability to print. Similarly, consoles and video games are the same way. You have PS4, you have a bunch of video games. The PS4, given the technology of the PS4, it's a crazy amount of technology. It's a supercomputer. It's relatively cheap, but the games themselves are very, very expensive. $60 often. Part of that is because it's hard to make video games, but still, that's a very big price gap when you consider the amount of technology and work in the console and the amount of effort in the video game. Well, especially since once you make the video game, right, you're done. It's a matter of just copying it. And that's a very easy thing to produce more of. Well, it's hard to produce additional consoles. PS4 games can only be used with the PS4. Nintendo, what are they doing now? I don't think people use the Wii anymore. But back when they did use the Wii, it could only be used with the Wii. Xbox with Xbox. So don't think of them as two different goods. Think of them as one good, the ability to play video games. And so when you start thinking of them as one thing that you're purchasing, you can begin to see the price discrimination. Because people who want to print a lot have a high willingness to pay. Not always, but typically. Not always, but typically. People who want to print a little have a low willingness to pay. People willing to pay little have just a low willingness to pay. And so thus, the people who only want to print a little just buy the base good, buy the printer, and maybe a couple of more ink cartridges, if that. And so they pay very little. While people who want to print a lot need to buy the base good and a whole bunch of the printers, A whole bunch of the inks, a whole bunch of those inks. And then they end up paying a great deal. Video games too, it's the ability to play video games. Well, people who are just casual gamers will buy the video game and then, will buy the console, the base good. Sometimes it comes with a video game and then they're done. But they might buy one or two other video games. They're done, they're entertained. They play that game over and over again. They're kind of casual, they don't play very much. They pay very little for the ability to play video games. While people who are avid gamers, who want the latest thing, who are constantly playing a lot of video games, who are using it a lot, end up paying a lot. Which makes sense. They have a high willingness to pay, right? They have to constantly get the new game. They're constantly showing out that $60. And that's the amount of money they pay. It is a lot for that ability to play video games. Typically, the base good is cheap. Near marginal cost, because you're trying to make sure that the entry to get started is very, very low, right? You want to make sure that people who have a low willingness to pay only have to pay a little. And if you need that base good, then that has to, by definition, be very, very low. So these are typically priced at near marginal cost, sometimes below marginal cost. While the variable good tends to be well above marginal cost. That's why it's so expensive. And that's why popcorn is so expensive at the movies. Because you are not really buying popcorn and movies. You are buying some time at the theater. And some people really want a movie-going experience. And some people just want to see the movie. The base good is the movie ticket. You might think movie tickets aren't very cheap, but keep in mind you have to think in terms of the costs to the movie theater. And movie theaters do not make their money on ticket sales. A lot of that ticket sales is passed on to the studios. Every ticket that they sell, a big chunk of it is not kept by them. It goes to the rights to the movie theater. They make tiny bits of money, if anything, on those tickets. They make their money in popcorn. The people who don't really care, who just want to go see the movie, who maybe have a low willingness to pay, who don't really care about a movie-going experience, will just buy the base good and see the movie. But people who want that experience will pay a lot higher price because they want the popcorn, they want the drink, they want the candy. This also explains why they don't charge for bathrooms or napkins. Because while people do have a strong connection, I want to be able to have a snack while I watch a movie. That's part of the experience. People do not have a strong attention to, I want to go to the bathroom during the movie or before the movie or after the movie. That's part of the experience, right? No one makes that connection. No one makes that connection with, I have napkins I get to play with while I watch the movie, right? No one cares about that, right? They're not really part of that experience. Right? What's part of the experience is the food. And so the food goes up. Right? You see the same thing in stadiums, and why food is so expensive at the stadiums is exactly the same story. It's all time. We should draw a distinction between time and what's kind of the opposite of time. Bundling. Bundling says, if you want to buy one good, whatever it happens to be, you have to also purchase a bunch of other things with it. Things you might not want, or things you might only be a little bit interested in. And then you buy the bundle. Oh, it's a cookie. Then you have to buy that bundle. And if you want any more of these other things, you have to buy a whole other bundle that looks just like it. Bundling is distinct from tying. Tying says if you want, you only have to buy the base good once, and then you can, and then the amount of the other good, the variable good, you can buy many, many times over. With bundling, if you want to increase the number of components, then you have to buy everything else at once. So let's do an example then of bundling. And the classic example is Excel. Excel is this great program for Microsoft Word. It's a really helpful, powerful program. It's a spreadsheet program if you're familiar with it. If you do accounting, you probably will be familiar with it at some point in your life. But you can't buy Excel by itself. If you want Excel, you have to buy the Microsoft Office suite. Which means you also have to buy Word, PowerPoint, Access. You can't buy more copies of Excel without then also buying these other components as well. They are part of one bundle. There's a lot of other examples of bundling. Streaming services is a great example. It's a great modern example where if you want to watch a show on Netflix, you subscribe to Netflix, and then you get a whole bunch of other shows you probably don't want. In fact, the vast majority of shows on Netflix, no one person watches. For one, there's just not enough time. But it's also like there's just such a wide variety of things. The likelihood that people would like the rom-coms with the same level as the sci-fi shows, with the same level as like the classics, with the same level as the dramas or whatever. It's like no one likes everything. But you purchase things you don't like. Cable TV is exactly the same way. Buffets are the same way. You go to the buffet, and as a result, you get access to all kinds of food, most of which you won't be interested in. Politicians are the same. You vote for a politician, there are a bundle of policies that include things you might like and things that you don't care about or might not like at all. Companies bundle when groups of people value parts of the bundle differently. This shows how it's price discrimination. Because if the bundle is assembled correctly, then lots of people should value the result the same way. That David should like the bundle the same as, say, Wilf does. Let's keep it simple and let's only have a bundle of two. Excel. So let's imagine David really loves Word and he's willing to pay $90 for Word, but only $10 for Excel. He likes Excel, he uses it occasionally, he doesn't use it that often. Well, Wilf loves Excel and only kind of likes Word. So in this simplified example, their opinions are just flipped. Well, this puts Microsoft in a funny position when it's trying to figure out how to price these, if it had to price them individually. If it had to price them individually and it priced them only at, say, $10, then it would get a revenue of just David would buy it, Wilf would buy it, Wilf would buy it $40. That's a bad idea. Maybe we'll price it at 90. Well, if we price it at 90, the revenue is I won't buy Excel, but no, David won't buy Excel because this obviously isn't me because I love Excel. But David won't buy Excel, but David would love Word. Wilf will buy Excel, but will not buy Word. So I won't buy that. Wilf won't buy that. And so there's only two purchases made. Revenue is 180. But let's imagine that Excel prices the bundle. So you can only buy this. You can only buy this. Well, the value of the bundle to David is $100. And the value to Wilf is also $100. Even though we like very different parts of the bundle we value the same. And so if Microsoft prices it at $100, their revenue is more than 40, it's more than 180, it's 200. And all they had to do was change how the products were presented. So the tricky part about making a bundle is making it so that everyone values it about the same level, even if they value it for very, very different reasons. And by valuing it at the same level, you just price it at that level. It's a little strange to call this price discrimination. It's a little strange on the surface because it doesn't seem like price discrimination. You know, like, I'm being charged 100. Someone who, while they're very different from me, is also being charged 100. I'm sorry, David, not me. So, why would we call this price discrimination? Because we're thinking in terms of, in the consumer's head, we're thinking about what motivates them. David is purchasing this bundle because largely of this, and a little bit of this, obviously, because largely of Word. And Wilf is purchasing it largely because of Excel. In other words, in their own heads, they are being charged 90 for the thing that they love and 10 for the thing that they find okay. Even if what they're purchasing is exactly the same in all appearances, the motivation for them purchasing it is very, very different. Just like essentially someone is paying less for the things they don't necessarily like, and they're paying more for the things that they do like. That's price discrimination. And that's what's happening here. It's functionally occurring within the consumer's own head. Any kind of bundle has this, but again, the goal, any sort of bundle has this basic theme, but the goal is to get each consumer to value the bundle the same. The goal is to get each consumer to value the bundle the same. Because before the transaction, you don't really know who feels which way. So your only real option is to try to construct it in such a way that the population in general, or at least as many people as possible, feel the same way. That's why Netflix has such a wonderful mix of options. They don't have too much on sci-fi. They don't have too many rom-coms. They don't have too many of any one particular thing because they're trying to make it appeal to everyone at about the same level. That's obviously very hard to do because you can't control preferences in that way, in that perfect way. But they can sort of do it on the margin. You know, if they have a lot of sci-fi shows already, they're not going to add another sci-fi show. If they're trying to figure out what to fund next, they're looking for gaps in people's preferences. What do we not have for people? What are we not offering? So that's the essence. Remember, the big difference between bundling and tying is that tying is you buy the base good and then you can buy a whole bunch of the subsequent goods. While bundling is if you want two different goods, or if you want one good, you have to buy a bunch of stuff you don't necessarily need, right? Or want that much, right? Bundling takes two products and sort of sticks them together in this 1-for-1 ratio, while tying draws two products together, but rather than a 1-to-1 ratio, it's a 1-to-many ratio.